When it comes to drawing for animation and storyboarding, one must be able to draw really fast and gestural. This may seem like a daunting task for someone who's learning how to draw for animation, someone who's just learning how to draw form, anatomy, structure. These are things that are kind of overwhelming. However, when it comes to producing very fast drawings, people tend to forget one of the main key things, which is just to nail the overall idea first, and strip the idea away from things that may seem distracting. In this video, I'd like to share and show some tips and secrets in how to be comfortable with drawing fast. There's a lot of topics I can talk about when discussing figure drawing for animation or learning how to draw the human anatomy in general. I, for one, can talk about shadows, shading, and lighting on a figure, contour drawing, and learning how to draw solid figures. I can also talk about breaking anatomy into simpler and much more easy to comprehend shapes, such as cubes, spheres, cylinders, and these are primitives I can use to show form. I can talk about breaking anatomy into bits and pieces, from skeletal to muscles to body parts, and how to break them down into simpler shapes. I can talk about techniques that I use when I approach fast figure drawing, and talk about how I think about angles, line of action, straights versus curves. Again, it's a vast world where I can talk about a lot of things. However, I'm not going to be talking about those right now, especially if you're just learning how to draw fast for the first time. Have you ever wanted to learn how to draw fast and be that douchebag that drew really fast? Well, this video is for you. Joking aside, let me talk about drawing fast and gestural. This is a super important skill to have when it comes to drawing for animation, for storyboarding, or for character design. Now, when I talk about drawing fast and gestural, I'm talking about, producing drawings under a short period of time that convey and communicate ideas. So I'll get more to that later, but if I were to say it now, it's like finishing a pose under a very short amount of time and just getting the overall essence and idea of that pose. Also, I'm talking about drawing fast and loose. So something that's, very gestural, it's full of energy, and that's something that's not super precious. Now, how is it important to animation and storyboarding, or character design, as I mentioned earlier? So, for animation, the rough animation stage, it prioritizes the idea and the action over how the drawing looks or the drawing quality. So this means that you're doing a rough pass and you have to produce really fast drawings so you just nail the general essence of the idea of your character acting and your action before you add the finishing details, such as putting it on model or adding details and cloth and accessories. Here again, strong poses, acting, and mechanics. In storyboarding, we have to draw hundreds of panels that consist of character acting while having a variety of different shots and staging and camera angles. Therefore, we need to develop a shorthand that allows us to produce really fast drawings that kind of represent what the final image or what the final product might look like. In character design, it's not just designing what the character looks or designing the costume for the character, but it's more about exploring the different shapes and proportions of the character, at the same time trying to play around with the character's poses. So when exploring these stages, it's best not to get too fixated on the details for now. All in all these three have something in common, which is drawing fast, finding a shorthand, and just getting the overall idea and performance out of the way first, rather than focus on details. Now, I have 3 secrets to drawing fast for animation that I want to share, or just 3 tips that I want to share when it comes to drawing fast in general. Now, I'm going to introduce these tips one by one as we do figure drawing exercises of 30 seconds per pose. The website I'm using to do these gesture drawings is called quickposes.com/n/gestures/timed. Like the previous website I've used, you can select what type of pose you want, what gender, if they have clothes, if they're nude, and how long each of these poses hold. The great thing about the service is that when you're done with a session, it will show all the previous poses as pictures, and you can save them, download them, and use them for later references. Or you can revisit some of these poses and add more to your drawings. What's great about this website is that it includes challenges, and you can also get a certificate that encourages you to get better at figure drawing in general. So go check it out. Now, the first secret, or the first tip that I feel is probably the most important, is to be fearless and risk-taking. Now, we're going to be making a lot of mistakes. We're going to make anatomy mistakes, we're going to be making proportion mistakes, But the point is to be able to be fearless and confident about just producing fast drawings that convey an idea. Now, the reason why some people slow down or they get slow at drawing is because they're becoming too careful and a bit more fearful when it comes to approaching drawing. So first of all, I'm going to do some bad examples first, because these bad examples are what hinders your ability to draw fast and to become confident when you do draw. So I'm going to start with some really bad examples. And bad example number one is where you're just being overly sketchy, overly hairy with your lines. These lines don't say anything about what it's describing. It's only just making it look indecisive, rigid, and in many cases, it can turn your drawing really stiff, especially if you're just drawing really straight lines. And the problem with this approach is that you're not really capturing the model as a whole, or how to describe the overall pose of the model and how everything works together. And I didn't even finish that. So another bad example would be to just be extra careful about where the contour, where the form is, and just making sure you make a perfect drawing on the get-go without having to do any other drawings. I think these things are valid to practice, but at the same time, this is something that can actually hinder your ability to draw fast, because you're being too careful and too cautious about being loose and free. And again, I didn't get to finish that. Another example would be to be overly, really academic. So you're measuring everything, the shoulders, the hips, landmarking, everything. And again, this is all very valid, and this is something that I will talk about sometime in the future. But the problem is that it's just making you really cautious about making a careful and planned out drawing without being able to be expressive, be free, and just feel things out. And those things will not allow me to finish a 30-second gesture. Now, as for the other techniques that I mentioned earlier in the video, if I were to show those right now, I'm pretty sure people new to drawing are going to spend more time just trying to focus on the how-to and the structure rather than just trying to let loose, which is the main point I'm trying to get across right now when it comes to just drawing loose. So right now, I encourage you guys to let go of just trying to find the drawing technique, the structure, the anatomy, and just let go of it. Or just maybe not hold it high on a pedestal for now. I also encourage you guys to draw with your arm rather than your wrist. Therefore, you're using your whole arm to be more flexible in those strokes. Also, drawing with the wrist can lead to injuries such as carpal tunnel. A lot of animators I know suffer from this, and this can put you out of drawing for a long time. The effects are long-term, so please draw more with your arm rather than your wrist. I also want you to hold the pencil more close to the end rather than the tip. This will allow you to be more loose and less rigid when you do draw. It'll also give you more flow when you are drawing. One final advice I'd like to give is to have your drawing or your tablet on an angle so your back is more straight and you can utilize your whole arm. This is to give you more motion in your shoulders and to prevent stiff necks. But this allows you to be more bold when you are doing fast drawings. So now I'm going to do some examples of how I would approach 30-second live drawings, especially for someone who's just getting started into doing really fast gesture drawings. So the way I would do it, and let's start right now, is that I would just, maybe just not let go of the pen or the pencil on the surface of the paper and really just try and capture the whole model as a whole. And I'm not really thinking about proportions or detail. I'm really just trying to do my best to capture the overall idea of the model. And I encourage you guys to use a thicker brush, or if you have a thicker brush, but other than that, any drawing pencil tool will work. And now for this pose, again, I'm just gonna feel it out without really thinking too hard about it. Sometimes I could even go contour mode where I'm only just looking at the outside silhouette and really just capturing the overall essence of what that model is doing. Now, the reason why I'm just going really fast because it's not giving enough time for me to think about proportion and all that. And just before 30 seconds, I could actually just finish a whole pose. Here's another one. I'm just gonna, again, capture the whole thing. You can start anywhere from the torso. I like to start from the torso because I've been recently training myself to look at the torso. And again, it doesn't have to be anatomically correct. Just capture the overall idea of what you're looking at. And you can use simple shapes. You can just not even let go of the tip with the surface of whatever you're drawing on. and you can just use really scribbly lines. And honestly, I sometimes would animate like this just to get the feel of the overall pose and the gesture without having to overthink about the anatomy, which we can always fix on later on. Again, just capture it. If you want to, you can also just go into blind contour mode. So I'm not even looking at my drawing. I'm just kind of drawing of what I'm looking at in front of me, in front of my reference. And again, this just helps me with my observation skills, really just trying to capture the creases without caring too much about the details and the technical aspect of the drawing. You can't really, it's not really the most detailed or anatomically correct drawing. It's not the most technically impressive, but it captures the overall idea of a guy face planting onto granite. You know, just I would advise you guys to draw really big at first, so you're actually getting that whole arm to move instead of your wrist. Because if you're just drawing with the wrist, and if you're just drawing really fast or really intricate, either or, you're just going to get burned out, and that can also lead to serious injuries like carpal tunnel, which is a really bad one that a lot of people in the animation industry suffer from. So I like to draw really fast with my arm. I'm not really using my wrist as much. I actually minimize the movement of my wrist so I can just use my arm. And I would sometimes like to have the drawing propped up on a slant so it doesn't feel like I'm just drawing straight onto the table. I like the Wacom or an animation desk, I like to have it tilted. And really just feel it out. If you don't really know how to draw the human body yet, that's fine. You know, you're just, honestly, the challenge I have for you is really just to try and capture the idea of the drawing. And things like line of action, anatomy, these are things that we can talk about later. We can discuss that. But for now, just try and capture the overall drawing without caring about proportion, without really worrying too much about the anatomy. Because again, like, especially in animation, this is how I would normally do my first pass, just really capturing the overall essence of the movement of what I want. You can even go almost stick figure mode, like here. I'm just gonna go like into almost stick figure quality just to feel it out. And this takes practice too, just to be comfortable with making all of these without caring too much about it. And again, I'm falling into drawing habits here where I'm breaking down everything into familiar shapes. And I don't really want to think too hard about that. I just want to try my best to capture what I'm looking at, even if I have to just look away from my drawing and just do my best to capture the overall idea in the most quickest way. And then if I finish a drawing even before the timer stops, I can quickly go back and make some fixes if I wanted to. I can go back and just make sure I have a drawing where I'm at least happy to show people around. Because again, this is all meant for practice, but the great thing about fast gesture drawing is that it's just meant to really loosen you up. And that's kind of why I like drawing, even up to this day, this is kind of why I like to draw this loose when I'm doing quick gesture drawings. Because it allows me just to loosen up, to warm up. Because, you know, sometimes when I start working, I'm still very stiff and I don't really want to move as much. But with quick gesture drawings like these, it helps me loosen up for the work I'll be doing for the rest of the day. And I think this is going to be the last one for this exercise. So again, really just capture it. You can start from anywhere, the head, the hip, whatever you feel is comfortable to you. And I'm just really just being really fast and just feeling it out. You can even you'll notice that maybe eventually, the more you do these, you're gonna find your own shorthand. I did a video on shorthands, and I hope you guys check that out after this video. Alright, so here are the drawings that I did from this session, and from these drawings alone, from these really fast gestures alone, although they're not the most technically impressive drawings right now, you can still get an idea of what's happening. And what I mean by that is there are story elements, there are overall poses. When you look at them, you can exactly tell what they're doing, how they're doing it, and just the ideas that they're trying to convey. Now, with these really rough drawings, I can actually just go back, let's say get another sheet of paper, And then if I really wanted to, so let's say all of this was just my animation roughs, the tie down stage would be me trying to figuring out the solid drawing foundation of that drawing using my knowledge on solid drawing, anatomy, breaking the shapes down and making sure each things connect the way they should be. And at least I have an idea of what I want rather than try and figure everything out. That is the purpose of the animation shorthand, which is to really nail down the idea, because a lot of people tend to get mixed up or too precious about how the drawing looks rather than nailing the overall performance or the action of the animation. And by doing these really quick gestures, you can easily do that very fast. Just feel out the movement immediately, and then if you wanted to do tie down where you add costumes and everything, then you can actually just go back later on and then add all that on top of your rough drawings. And I can just turn it off, and now we have something that's a bit more solid than our rough gesture. So the second tip that I want to share is to be bold and decisive. So this means that if you're going to put down a line, make sure you know exactly where you're going to put it and where it's going to go. And this is something that comes with practice too. You have to train yourself to see a drawing or to look at your drawing, and once you put down the line, you already know exactly how it's going to be laid out. So this means fewer strokes maybe. This means being less sketchy and being less hairy with your lines. Being hairy with your lines usually means that you're inconfident or inconsistent with how you draw something. Whereas if you're just drawing with bold, single stroke lines, it shows you're more confident, you know exactly where your lines are going to, and you're just making decisions. So be decisive about where you lay your lines. Alright, next we're going to do a practice on just making bold decisions. So this means that whenever you put a line down, you leave it and you have to work with that line no matter what. You can't just keep sketching over it, you just have to keep working with it. And the thing about life is, it's all about making decisions you have to live with. So for this practice, we're just going to use one line or one stroke per decision, and we just leave it as that. We don't just keep sketching again and again. Now this one's a bit harder because now it's making you a bit more careful, but at the same time, it's making you live on with some of those really crucial decisions that you made. And again, this is just supposed to help you be okay with whatever decisions you come up with when you're doing really fast drawings. For this one, notice how I'm just making really simple shapes for now, because I think for these fast gesture drawings, I just want to make simple shapes in order to finish these drawings. But notice how I am just using one line to complement or to finish one part of the body, or just a few lines. But the thing is, I'm only making decisions here. I'm not really being super loose. I'm just being okay with whatever I put down on the paper or the drawing tablet. If you want to, simplify your lines, simplify the way you're breaking down the model so you can actually finish this. So notice here is that I'm not even trying to capture every crease of this dude's pants. I'm just trying to capture each body part as a simple shape. And we're going to talk more about this decisive shape making later in the future and what I'm thinking about when I'm doing these. But when you're doing really fast drawings, especially for boarding, and you don't want to be too scribbly or too sketchy, because sometimes, especially for animation or storyboarding, if your drawing is too sketchy, it might be a little hard to read. So you want to be really decisive about what lines you're making, and be okay with it. Be okay. You can't go back and fix things. You can't just go back and sketch like this. You just have to be okay with leaving it alone and working with it. And just practice making those really clear single strokes. Really pay attention to the angles of the hips, the legs, and make your lines count. Don't always be really loose. If you want to draw fast and have really clear drawings really fast, then just practice being decisive. Practice being okay with whatever line you put down, even though it's not the most perfect line. So you can tell that I want to go back and fix the face. I want to go back and redraw the face, but for now I just can't, because I have to be extremely Again, I'm using this word a lot, decisive of what lines I put down. And if you want to, be okay with drawing over over your shapes. You don't have to like now have under drawings. I think it's important for you to draw over, under, through. And I noticed this arm should be longer, and that's fine. I'm like, okay, I can't really change that. I can only work with what I have now, but at least it's clear to me. At least I can work with that. You don't want to constantly keep going back and forth to just one part of a body, especially if you're just trying to finish the whole body as a single form. You want to really just nail it down to the most simple gesture. And, you know, the previous example I showed, I still do it all the time just to loosen myself up. But if I want to like have really clear lines in the get-go, and I'm trying my best not to even go back to that line, then you have to just be okay with whatever decisions you make, or being bold with your lines. So for here, you know, I could focus on the cloth of this dude, but I'm just gonna focus on his body for now, because I feel like it's all about prioritizing. I'm making a conscious decision to prioritize on just getting the form of his body, or the overall gesture with all these simple shapes. And then I can go back and then add those details or those cloth, because I feel like, oh, it's Norman Reedus, because I do feel like those do define the models too. But my priority and my decision making is really based on focusing on the overall pose and the action of my figure. If I were doing animation, however, I wouldn't really use this. I would use more of the first example, because I like to feel my drawings out, especially when I'm not doing anything from reference. But when I'm using reference, or when I know what exactly I'm drawing, then I'm more decisive about my lines, and really just making one single stroke count as one part of the model. I'm gonna do two more, and we're gonna break it down. But again, like, just being okay with whatever line I come up with. And you may be wondering, oh, maybe I'm thinking too much about anatomy. And yes, in a way, I am thinking about my experience with anatomy, or drawing anatomy in general. But the case still stands where I'm not even trying to break down the anatomy, even though I'm more focused on just trying to get those simple lines to read my gesture. And I think I'm going to stop it at that. So these are the drawings from that session, and all I can say is these drawings, you know, they're not as expressive or as loose or as gestural as the previous ones, but the thing is, I learned a lot from just learning how to place my lines down, making sure each line just counts. I try and just go really simple with my lines, like not complex shapes like these, just more like quick, fast, bold decisions, and learning how to live with that, because it's all about, when it comes to animation, it's all about learning how to simplify the overall thing without having to worry too much about all these creases. You're trying to simplify the gesture, maybe even simplify the design. And even from here, I can go back. So if I would minimize the opacity of each of these, I can go back and fix these drawings if I wanted to, like add construction, add structure, really break down the figure with life drawing fundamentals, and learning how to break it down into really simple shapes, and then just tying it down, adding clothes, making those details, adding creases to the pants. These are things that I can add later on, but for now, at least I have an idea of what I have. And the way a lot of people board, especially in storyboarding, this is pretty ideal because it's not too scribbly. It's not too scribbly, and it still reads. It's still loose, but then again, there's not a lot of unnecessary detail that would make it a bit hard to read. But even I can say that the ones that I did earlier, like these still read to me, and I can still get the gesture, but most cases, this reads much clearly and faster. Now, the third secret is no-brainer because it really comes down to experience. So this means that you've been drawing for a long time, you've been drawing many times, you've been doing a lot of fast gesture drawings for a long period of time, and also you've been learning how to draw and break down anatomy, you've learned fundamentals, you've learned technique, and you've been applying those skills into your drawings so many times that it becomes muscle memory. It becomes ingrained into you. So when you do fast gesture drawings, you're already thinking about angles, techniques, construction in your mind as you lay down these drawings. The last two examples I showed are naturally how I approach life drawing or quick gesture drawing, but there are times where I implement anatomy, my knowledge on the hips, the angles, and the gesture, and action lines, and all these life drawing techniques that I learned over time. And these are things that you can acquire throughout experience, and those are things that I'll have to cover in another video. But let's say I do I'm thinking about all my experiences and all my learning, and I'm going to apply them for this gesture drawing session. So let's start. So from here, normally people like to get the action line and really do a quick breakdown of the gesture, so that when they actually start breaking it down into actual anatomy, they already have a base for that. But the thing about this is that it does require you to be a bit more precious, which is this is the reason why I kind of stayed away from this approach at first, because it does make you feel a bit more cautious. Like I'm going to do the guy on the right where I'm thinking about the line of action. And again, these are just techniques that anyone can learn and anyone can just use over time. But I would say just mix it up. So even me doing this, I can also feel myself becoming a bit more precious and careful about how I draw, because I'm trying to make everything feel a bit more technical. Even though normally when I do these fast gesture drawings, I like to be very loose. Sometimes I like to think about the outside contour or the outside silhouette first and then make my way through. So depending on the pose, something like this where it's more static and more more symmetrical, then I kind of just do like a contour or silhouette drawing just so that I nail the overall shape, and then work my way into the details of the anatomy. Now for something like this, I could just also break down everything first or add landmarks so I know where everything goes, and then make my way to finishing a quick version of that drawing. But I feel like I'm tiring myself out more when I do something like this, because I'm not being super loose, I'm being a bit more tight than usual. And it can actually hinder me from just drawing loosely. Again, sometimes I like to measure out the hips and everything. So things like anatomy, those are things that you learn over time. You have to study it on your own. It's not something that you can just learn by just drawing quickly, because the thing about being able to draw quickly and good, so let's say you produce really good drawings, is that you have to be able to take time to really study things at a slow pace. So you're actually absorbing what you're learning rather than just going full on force fast. And if you just go too fast, sometimes you're not really learning much, which, if you want to learn, you have to take the time. You can't just approach things really fast. Really take that time to study drawing, study anatomy, and study everything else about just gestures in general. But depending on what I want to focus on, so let's say I want to focus on shapes like the previous ones, then I don't really do much of an underdrawing. I just do really broad shapes like this, and just simplify the overall gesture with these shapes. So if I just want to focus on shapes, I can do that. But the problem with this sometimes is that the drawing can end up looking stiff if I'm not careful, or if I'm being a bit too careful. It's weird. And something like this, it's like, okay, I can see the tilt actually of her pelvis and her hips. I mean rib and hip. And then I can look at the silhouette and just focus on those negative spaces so I can put in everything I can to put in and fill in the remaining detail. Again, not the most perfect drawing, so this one, sometimes if I want to, I can just focus on the action line and then focus on putting everything else on top of that action line. So I'll do another example with that in mind. With the action line thing I was talking about. So for this one, let's say I'll draw the head first, and then I'll draw the action line. And then from here, you can actually just add in your rib, hips, and then for here, you don't really see much. But it's the thing about figure invention is that you're gonna have to be able to learn how to see the anatomy through, or what is the foundation behind this pose when things like cloth and costume are covering that subject. Again, let's say head, action line, and then I'll focus on the angle. So there are techniques that you can use. Like this is a very basic life drawing approach where I'm nailing all the important life drawing checklist, which I have things to say about that, but it's actually very useful when you're really trying to find a system that works for you. I didn't even get to finish that post. God damn it. I can even just like do like a stick figure approach, and then just add an anatomy and taper the limbs. I don't have time to fill out some of the crucial anatomy detail. I'm just going to indicate it, connect all the closed open lines, and then just finish it at there. So those are some other ways that you can approach these quick gesture drawings. So just by looking at these drawings, this is coming from someone who came from life drawing classes and applied some of those techniques for some of these figures, such as finding the angle of the shoulders and the hips while breaking down the pelvis and the ribs into more simplified shapes, and learning how to break down anatomy into simpler shapes. These are all coming from past experiences that you can learn over time if you just keep drawing, if you just also keep studying about human anatomy and then applying those studies into these quick gestures. Now, sometimes I wouldn't really do these approaches when I'm actually animating or drawing. I would actually go a lot more simpler than this. This is just for me to study and practice, but usually I would go more simpler, and then as usual I would draw over it with more closer to accurate, I wouldn't say fully accurate, but closer to accurate anatomy or construction to make everything feel more complete, finished, and solid. And I would always do this in the tie down stage. The tie down stage for me, this is the reason why I like to keep my my rough passes loose, is so that the tie down stage is where I actually start figuring things out. This is again just an idea of what I want or what I have, and using the tie down I can start turning that idea into something that's a bit more tangible. And that's why I would keep everything loose for my first passes. Be okay with making mistakes and be okay with letting things go and learning how to fix them later on. Remember, those mistakes are not failures. They're lessons. They're lessons that you can take on from the next time you approach drawing. But if you want to learn how to draw fast and be confident with it, well, you have to be okay with letting things go. Really nail down the overall idea first, and then you can come back and fix the drawing later on with details and tie down. Now, when it comes to drawing fast and producing good work out of it, well, that's a subjective and also another whole topic that I could talk about. But for now, go do those fast drawings. Be loose, be free, and be fearless. And eventually, you'll find a shorthand of your own that will just work for you. I made a video about shorthands for animation. If you want to go check that out, please check out my previous video on approaching full figure animation with shorthands. Other than that, try drawing 30-second poses through gesture or figure drawing. Anyways, thanks for hearing me out, and I hope you learned a lot from this video. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.